I'm June Westphal. I was born here at Eureka Springs, just outside the present city limits at Greenwood Hollow. And actually, I'm one of those fortunate Americans who was born in a log cabin. I've often made a little joke, which maybe is not the world's greatest joke, but that I'm just like Abraham Lincoln, that I was born in a log cabin, although not quite that long ago, as Mr. Lincoln. Our family is very old in this region. My mother's people, Harps and Worleys and Vaughns, began to come into this area in the 1820s when it was first available for homestead and for claiming the land. And then on the Johnson side, and that's my born name, is Johnson. My father's people, the Johnsons and the Clarks, came more from a northern route, Kentucky to Iowa to Missouri, and they've been here since 1880, just about the same time Eureka Springs got started. So it is a long heritage that I have in many generations in this place. And there are many other families just like me. There really are quite a large number of those who have been here for their lifetimes plus generations before them, and are very proud, as I am, to have the privilege of calling Eureka Springs our home. So I grew up as a child. One of my first memories is going to the spring house and getting water to drink, and drinking milk that had been poured into a jug, and then the jug submerged in the cold water in the spring house in order to keep it nice and keep it ready at a very drinkable temperature, much like your refrigerator does today. So the spring is part of my life from the very beginning. A spring is always there somewhere in my memory. When I was 10 years old, we moved just a couple of miles so that we were actually inside the city limits, and we're on Plainer Hill. And so it was necessary in the time that we moved so that we could continue going to school, and I became one of those students of the old red brick. From Plainer Hill, that meant that every day I would have a reason to walk across town and pass quite a number of the springs and go up to the top of the hill where the old red brick school was located. So all of these springs became very familiar to me even as a 10, 11, 12-year-old child, and stopping to get a drink of water was a very big part of my day at whichever spring I happened to be passing when I was thirsty. And like my friends that I grew up with and went to school with, we often played around the springs, and they were, as others have expressed, part of our daily life in a very real way. I got interested in history. I was living through history, but when I was a teenager, just out of high school, I got a chance at a job with the Chamber of Commerce, and the Chamber of Commerce director was a man named Sam Leith. Sam Leith had been here since 1890, and he loved Eureka Springs. He loved the springs, he loved the stories, the traditions, he loved the Indian legends that were long before the settlers who came in as pioneers. And so Sam Leith taught me every day. He talked and talked and talked and talked, and I listened and remembered so much that he shared about the history of Eureka Springs, and stories and tales and legends, and many, many of them relating to the springs themselves. And Sam had discovered Eureka Springs, he always said, discovered it, when he attended the Chicago World's Fair Exposition in 1893, and there were samples there being exhibited and being judged of the spring waters from Eureka Springs, Arkansas. And he began to learn about Eureka Springs and couldn't wait to come here. And once he arrived, very shortly afterwards, he never wanted to leave again. So Sam discovered Eureka Springs as it had become and was becoming well known across the nation since its founding in 1880, 1879 really. So my history interest began very early on, both living through the ongoing history and of having very intentionally received a great deal of knowledge about it from someone who had lived through it many, many more decades than myself. And as I began to think about what I would like to do, I've always liked to write. I've always liked that. That's a big part of my interest in life, reading and writing. And so as it turned out, I began to write facts, research, and write down the facts of history, documenting everything I could, whether it was from a newspaper of 1880s or 90s, the very scant number of them that are available, or whether it was from guidebooks that were published back in that era and all the eras in between then and now. All of these things told me the story of Eureka Springs and what it meant to the people who first came, what was happening in their world that was affecting them, why they wanted to come to this one little dot in the Ozark, Arkansas wilderness to start a new life here based on finding an answer to their hopes and dreams and their prayers. People who were very accepting of the idea of natural healing, of spiritually related healing, and sources of healing of that nature have ever been noted as coming through the waters. The one thing that we absolutely have to sustain life is water, and it is so necessary to us. And before we could get it just by opening a tap and knowing we were going to get clean and good and drinkable water that wouldn't do us any harm, people were often hard put to find water that was good for them, to find enough of it in this country, and to not be subject to the fear of waterborne diseases such as typhoid and cholera and such things that swept across settlements in the frontier America and pioneer America. So the people who came here came with a mindset that has never died. Generation after generation have carried it forward. The idea that there is something very special and very magical here. It's not something that just happens once in a while. It is something that is very definitely part of our personal, everyday lives and the lives of our families, the lives of all the people who are important to us in the community. And so a most unusual community got started because the people who came here in the very first days came very quickly. They came from all points of the compass. They came from all directions, from all kinds of backgrounds, from all kinds of abilities and education and or lack of education, whether they were pioneer settlers or whether they were people from the larger cities. They came because they had this same human need and interest in finding renewed life here. So that created, because it happened so quickly, that, and with such a mixture of people, it created a unique situation that Eureka Springs immediately became and has continued to be a place that is different from other small towns in our area here of the Arkansas Ozarks because it is such a mixture of people from so many different places, so many different points of view, and then the ongoing nature of that mix of people as we have come through now over 130 years of our history as an organized town. So growing up here was pretty special, and the very best of small town, hometown life as we were growing up, and simplicity and a good lifestyle and safety and security. So we couldn't have asked for much more than we had in those growing up years that were part of my life and coming into adulthood. But I just got more and more interested in the 1960s in doing something productive about this history that I knew a good bit about already and knew that there were places I could research more. So I began to seriously research. And I found an ally at one of my favorite places, which is Carnegie Public Library. One of the great blessings of Eureka Springs since early days is our wonderful free public library. And the librarian was a woman named Catherine Osterhage. And Catherine was, I was at the early mid part of life, and Catherine was in her retirement years, but still being very productive as the librarian for the community. And the two of us just clicked as being, she as one who had recently come to Eureka Springs, and I as one who had lived here for all of my years since I was a child. And we were both just equally interested in finding the factual history of Eureka Springs. And so we began what resulted in a book that we published in 1971. Unfortunately, Catherine, because of a sudden severe illness, died just as the book was coming from the publishers, so she didn't get to share in all of the, much of the time where people were beginning to appreciate this as a text that actually gave you factual history in an interesting and I think almost painless way about the history of a very special small town. And then from there, then people began to ask me to do research, to tell them about this or that. Every time there was an event, I began to provide information and research things. This was part of daily life in the community. And it was a part of that time in the 70s when we had become a National Register historic district here in Eureka Springs. And we were really all going in the same direction of believing that our future was in our history. Our future would be based on the best way of preserving and restoring and presenting to the traveling public and to those who were interested our history and all the evidences of it, because it is such a special community. So that is when I began researching, and I've always been fascinated with the springs. There are hundreds and hundreds of photographs that show all of the people, the structures. They're just, in fact, there's something like 5,000 of them in one main collection. They've been copied into that collection and are preserved in the Bank of Eureka Springs or Cornerstone Bank collection. And these are pictures that show us everyday life, and they show us the springs, they show us the structures, they show us the people in the streets and in their homes and the beautiful things that they built. And so it's a tremendous collection, but it's also a great tool of research. And hundreds of those pictures are of the springs themselves, of these beautiful little spots in the environment where there's a cold water spring coming from out of the earth at some point on the rocky hillside or down in the deep rocky hollows all around Main Street and West Mountain, Spring Street, the northern part of town down North Main Street or East Mountain, or even over the hill to Oil Spring Gulch, where Black Bass Lake is, where there's so many springs in these different areas. And the photographs do exist, and we have now been able to find many and many hundreds of them that do record images of those sites as they were in 1879 and as they were in later years, and now they're still with us today. So working on recording the history of the Springs is something that I've shared with a great number of people, because there is this recognition that yes, we're a beautiful little city and we have beautiful architecture, but it would not have happened had the springs not been in this particular place, and that those springs are what brought the first people who came to this big encampment and formed a town here and built a beautiful little city in those early years of the 1880s, 1890s, and then kept it going and continued, and others came and joined them, and this belief and this understanding has certainly been passed on throughout all of our history to the present day, so that people come in today who've never been here before and almost immediately have this response that they too find it to be as some of my friends have said, a mystical, magical place. And it's important to them in what they need in their lives, just like it was to the people who first came in those early days. The Springs were recognized to be of such importance that the very first government organization, and that would have been the first mayor and council as they began to organize the town, as we became recognized by the state of Arkansas as the city of Eureka Springs in 1880, they began to do the things that were necessary to make an orderly community here that we could all enjoy. And the first ordinances had to do with protecting the springs that were so important. They delineated spring reservations, surveyed them around the major springs that were visited by the visitors who came here, and used by them and used by the townspeople, so that those would be protected the best way they knew how in an earlier era, long before the modern technical things that we know today. But that was their first work, was to protect the springs with these public laws that would make sure that the springs and the land around them would be preserved in perpetuity for the people forever. So that was just an amazing thing, that they understood that so well and took up their responsibility to try to do everything they could to protect the springs in their time. Then the next part became building a beautiful community. And after the community was just thriving, they really didn't have to do much other than respond to the fact that hundreds of people were building structures here as quickly as they could get access to a building lot in this fast-growing little city. And then, of course, it was understood then that our reason for being was that we would be receiving people from other parts of the country, even from other parts of the world, who wanted to come and visit, who wanted to come and were being invited to come and be treated here, find the healing and the restoration of their lives that they were looking for, to be treated in bathhouses, to just simply be here in a recreational way for whatever period of time they could spend. And so that required hotels and boarding houses and places to eat food, and the bathhouses and the facilities so that they could be taken care of. So that was the beginning of what evolved into recreational tourism, of inviting the whole public out there to come to Eureka Springs, whether it was for the intentional use of treatment facilities, or whether it was just because it's such a beautiful place and such a natural, inviting environment that they wanted to come just for the pure joy of being here. And it became very quickly important to people as a recreational destination that they'd already heard about because of others in their history of their families having known about it in the generations before them. So the entire history of the economy of Eureka Springs has been based on inviting the visitor for whatever period of time they can stay, providing the facilities for them, providing the accommodations for the time that they're here, and for their comforts and for their enjoyment. And that is our economy. All those things that relate to it, that undergird a service industry of tourism, has been our economy from the very beginning. So that's a special way of living that, unless you've been a part of it, it's hard to understand that is the way you actually can have a very strong economy.
Question, including in that, can you address like the influx of the artists?
Okay, sorry, I'm gonna get a drink here. Say a question.
The influx of the artists?
Oh, yes, yes.
Because we've got recreational, but then,
yes.
Attracting the artists and stuff is also part of it.
When Eureka Springs was just getting started, and today we know we have beautiful shops and galleries, and you can buy arts and crafts, you can buy beautiful artworks and artisans' pieces that you can take home. And the same thing was true in the 1880s, because from the very beginning people began to create little shops. They would have special souvenirs made that people would purchase. Some of them were handcrafted items, or handcrafted pieces of art that were purchased, and there was always a ready market for them as the visitors would come and stay. So the artists have always been with us. The writers and poets were responsible for so many of the beautiful words written about Eureka Springs that went out by being published in newspapers and the media of the day. So that was a big, an important part of telling the world about Eureka Springs, is using beautiful words, prose or poetry. And so that artistic skill was a part of the community. And that never left us throughout all the years, having artists and crafts people among us, having writers and poets. All of these folks have been a part of the entire history of Eureka Springs, and we've been able to discover and preserve some good evidences of some of the very earliest writings, even of some of the earliest artworks, and the beautiful pieces of metalwork or pottery or those kinds of things that date from before the turn of the 20th century. So there's ample evidence of it. And then in the time in America everybody thought was the worst in our history, what we now refer to as the Great Depression, we received a wonderful gift as the community, because it was a time when we had a tremendous influx of people who wanted to live and practice their skill, their gift, their artistic ability, and do it in a beautiful place. And they came to Eureka Springs. They came and lived here, and all of us together weathered the Depression, and it was many dozens of them that turned into hundreds of them as the next couple or 3 decades after World War II into the 60s and 70s, more and more artists and artisans came here. And so the beginning of it was that enormous number of people coming during the Great Depression. and deciding that they too wanted to stay here. Even after times got a little easier, they still wanted to stay here. And then others came to join them as the decades went by. So yes, one of our great treasures in Eureka Springs is the fact that we have had from the beginning, and certainly in the largest numbers in the second half of the 20th century, large numbers of artists who not only have the gift of their art, but they can find here the opportunity to practice it and to live comfortably and live well in this place by the practice of their art. So it's an important part of the overall history, and it all fits into this whole thing about the relationship between the person and the personal needs, the personal understandings of things, and the environment, and that environment being very beautiful and healthy and natural in its own right, but also within that environment is this wonderful gift of water, which comes to us through the springs. So it all is so much a part of the whole package, and the whole of it is what creates this very special quality of Eureka Springs, which people like me who have a long history here, and those who came before me here, and those who have come more recently, we understand each other, and in that we have the same kind of appreciation in our own individual lives for what we found here and what we keep on enjoying and being glad about every day that we live here. So that's an important aspect of life in Eureka Springs. We have probably weathered the decades better than almost any small town you could point out to me, or city anywhere, because we have been able to respond to the changes in what people were looking for. In the Victorian era, when Eureka Springs was brand new, there was a desperate need for healing, and there was great suffering, sometimes for a lifetime, by people who had very little help or expectation of help from medicine or surgery, because that was before the time that we actually made such tremendous strides as human beings in being able to actually cure, alleviate pain, or do surgery or treatments that are so important to us today are a part of the 20th century. They didn't really exist to any great degree in that period of the end of the 19th century. So people really had nothing that would help them other than what they fell back on, and that was their own faith and spiritual values, and their own belief in the sources of natural healing and accepting natural healing, and water being a primary source of that was so important to them. But then in 1900 or so, times changed, and we had become a much more modern nation. Everybody was looking to the modern era, to the future. And so we had the railroad by then. We had a sort of different kind of tourist visitor coming in around the turn of the century, and we could respond well to that because Eureka Springs had good things for them and could provide for them. And we built beautiful structures. So many of the stone buildings that we have today, the stone and brick buildings that have been preserved, were built in that era from the late 1890s into the first couple of decades of the 1900s. So that's really the city that you see today, the beautiful stone and brick structures, as well as the residential structures built in such beautiful style. that, of course, then went on a very short time until all of a sudden we were into the automobile age, and everybody was giving up the old horse and buggy, and they lost interest in using the trolley car, and they lost interest in using train travel as they had done for decades before, because everybody wanted their own personal automobile, and families began to purchase automobiles quite routinely. By 1920, there were many people in Eureka Springs already owned their own motor car, and there were those people coming in as rapidly as we could build roads that were fit for travel across country, so that they could come as tourists in a new kind of tourism, which was automobile tourism. And in the 1920s, we certainly did turn into, and we're turning into, an automobile tourism destination amongst many other towns and beautiful places in the Ozark region. People were coming by the hundreds, and many thousands of them in their own automobiles, to visit the places that they had long known about, like Eureka Springs. So there was a wonderful future ahead of us at the end of the 1920s, when all of a sudden there was a great crash, of the economy, and we went into the what has come to be known as the Great Depression for those 10 or 12 years. And then with World War II, that was very much a down time in World War II. But then when that was over, there was another amazing resurgence of people of America wanting to go back to the simpler things, wanting to get out of the cities, wanting to have the best of what they remembered of America and make sure that they didn't lose it. They'd, come through this terrible war, and the country was really ready to enjoy the old styles of living and the old traditional ways. So Eureka Springs had about 15 years from the end of World War II to 1960, where it was it was very much what we think of when we talk about the 50s in America, and what people remember as those happy days of the 50s. Actually, I guess they used the title Happy Days for the 60s, but certainly the 50s was the white picket fence and families in their own homes, and all of that image of somewhat rural America being so important to people, and we were able to adapt to that. We began a thing called package tourism. Package tours, so that if you lived in Chicago and you had a 2-week vacation and you were one individual who had a paid vacation, then you just could pay one price, and then everything from the day you left your home till the day you return was all covered. Your transportation, your place to stay at Crescent Hotel or Basin Park Hotel in Eureka Springs. And then every day you had wonderful things to do. You had all the food you could possibly want. You had hay rides and picnics and swimming parties and tennis and horseback riding and anything, sightseeing, anything that you would enjoy during that period of time you were here, and then you were safely seen back to your home city when it was over. So there was a tremendous resurgence of tourism of that kind and of the family tourist travel. In the 60s, there was another slowdown which no one could seem to understand, although the 60s was a unique time in American history, generally speaking. But then all of a sudden, in 1970, we had already accomplished, because of the great thinking of and the vision of local people, we had accomplished being listed on the National Register as a historic city, as a historic district, and we were recognized in the year of 1970. And then we were working toward National Bicentennial with lots of nostalgia and lots of people interested in going back to the historic places. And from that point on to Eureka's own centennial in 1979, we were just I was so focused on the wonderful history and how we could share it with the rest of the world, and things just went from wonderful to better. And then in the 1980s, things were very good across the country, economically speaking. And so our tourism industry, group touring, people tours of all kinds, and the wonderful opportunities for our artists and craftspeople to have their own beautiful shops and galleries, and to have these events that would highlight them. That started in the mid-1960s, to do the highlighting events of the artists and craftspeople, and all of that just grew and grew until we built something very beautiful through that era. So I think that that is one of the great things about Eureka Springs, is that we are able to weather transitions of different interests on people's part, of different economic situations, of different needs that people have, and are able to respond to those in ways that have been proved over and over and over in these 130 years since we became this sudden overnight sensation of the city in the wilderness called Eureka Springs. So it is, to me, it's an amazing history up to this point, and no reason why it shouldn't just keep on being the most amazing place, and the most, and to be appreciated for what it is, as a very special place to live, a beautiful place in its environment, a beautiful built environment, and to have the springs as sort of the thing that ties us all together in our spirits and in our understanding of what it's all about. So I think that is what's going to happen with Eureka Springs, is it's just going to keep on responding to the needs of the people who need Eureka Springs, and those who live here will just go right on into something new and special in response to that need in this 21st century. So I just look for really good things to happen, as I have always looked at all the great things that happened, and that I was able to research from available materials and write them down. And I've always said that in all of those written things, in all of those letters and journals and documents and poems and beautiful prose writings that were published to the world in the media of its day, that all of that really is telling Eureka Springs, telling her own story through those abilities of the people and the evidences that have been left, the photographs, the images of the people who were here long before I was born and long before this present day. So with that, I think I will conclude that I still keep researching every day, and we keep finding new material. That's the most amazing thing, is that every so often someone else comes up with yet another photograph we've never seen. Someone from out in the country outside of Eureka Springs suddenly makes available an artifact of some historical happening or of some person or event that it's always exciting to see what's coming next. And it's still out there because there are so many people in America who in their traditional family history have some knowledge of Eureka Springs, because someone long before their life probably was here and had a good experience in this place. So it just keeps happening, and we just keep going on being the very special place that Eureka Springs is. The book that I co-authored with Catherine Osterhage is called A Fame Not Easily Forgotten. That title came from a line in a poem which Catherine wrote that's included in the book. And it talks about how Eureka Springs had known a fame not easily forgotten. And at the time we were writing that book, the poem speculated about what was coming next, because we were researching that book right in the middle of the 1960s, when we didn't have any idea in Eureka Springs what was coming next. And so it was almost prophetic what she had written in her poem, that yes, Eureka Springs had known a fame not easily forgotten, and yet was questioning what's coming next. And so some of the things I've talked about were what came next, some really, really good things. So that was the reason for our title, A Fame Not Easily Forgotten. That is, has been out of print for a very long time, but is about to become republished again in the year 2010 as Carnegie Public Library celebrates 100 years of the library. The book will be reprinted and available to people again, and it is my gift to the library and to the people that want to keep on finding out facts about early Eureka Springs and about her story. The second thing I did after that book was published in 1971, then, as I had mentioned before, I did go ahead and write a series of articles. I wrote for the Chamber of Commerce. I researched and wrote about events that were being reenacted or played out in the community, historical events. And then in the next one was in 1979 for the centennial. We did a postcard history, and I was a co-author on the text of that. That was published by the Centennial Commission. Then I did a history of the Methodist people in Eureka Springs for my church, the Methodist Church, in 1980. And it is much more than just a simple little church history, because it is a story of one particular group of people that formed a church, and they're progressing through their time in the 100 years, because it had been founded the very same year of the town. But then I also, in that book, talked a great deal about what was happening in the state of Arkansas, what was happening here, what it meant to Eureka Springs, that the houses of worship were a part of Eureka Springs from its very beginning, and that it was something that was so natural to the people, because they did have great faith, and they celebrated that faith, and they celebrated their healings, and their appreciation was very great. So the practice of religious faith has been very strong in Eureka from its very earliest days. So that was published in 1980, and then in 1987 I published, or I wrote a series of an even dozen articles, one per month, for a local publication called Ozark. Oh dear, I've forgotten the name of that, but it was published in a monthly visitors publication that went out free, and it went out by many thousands to invite people to come to Eureka Springs. So each month for one full year, I had an article in a sort of sequential history of the decades of Eureka Springs. And then when that was over, then I was given permission to go ahead and publish it as my book, which was called The Eureka Chronicles. The Eureka Chronicles. It's also out of print. I hope sometime we'll be able to get it back in print again. But it's available at the library and at the museum for people to read, so it isn't completely gone. So since then, I have written many articles and published them in any form of the media that I can make use of. But the big project that I have done since 1978 or 9 is for Bank of Eureka Springs, now called Cornerstone Bank. in that year, in 1978, they wanted to do a customer appreciation piece, and so the calendar that you could hang on the wall of your office or hang on the wall of your parlor at home was given free to the patrons. And because they had already begun this project of collecting and preserving photographs of early Eureka Springs, it was an opportunity to show people those photographs. So every one of those calendars in large size would have full-page photographs, early Eureka Springs views and topics and subjects, and the whole 12 calendar pages plus additional pages of historical text and information. And I worked on all of those but the first two, I believe, and I'm still working on them currently for the 2010 calendar. It's in the process right now. So that has been a big ongoing work, and each one of those calendars really does exist as a little, it's like a little booklet. And so if you stack the 30-something of them up, you've got a very large book indeed of photographs and my writings and my historic research in that form. And they were created by Bank of Eureka Springs over all those 3 decades. And they are the kind of thing that when bank patrons and many other people, they're circulated to many other people, the several thousand of them a year, they are never thrown away. Those are the kind of things that people have in their family homes. They keep them in collections, in libraries. They're not tossed when the year is over. In fact, most of them are not even written on. You know, people use some other calendar to write the dates of their life events and keep their calendar about Eureka Springs as something that they can keep as a family keepsake for now and for the future. So that's an overview of the writing I've done since 1965. My favorite childhood memory is after we moved to Plainer Hill, to the house on Plainer Hill, when I was 10 years old. My grandmother, my father's mother, lived in the house that is today the Eureka Springs Historical Museum, the Caliph House. She lived in the apartment on the second floor, in an apartment that had the porch overlooking Main Street. And so I spent a great deal of time there. And of course, it's right beside Caliph Spring. And across the street, of course, it's just parking space now between Main Street and Armstrong Street, place for street and cars. But in those days, there was a watering trough filled with water from Caliph Spring. It was a large concrete rectangular watering trough. It had been built back in the era when there was a blacksmith shop where the office supply is in present time. There had been a blacksmith shop there, and in early days they built, they had stable yards in that part of town, and they built this watering trough, and people coming and going with their horse-drawn vehicles or riding horseback used that watering trough. So when I was a little girl, my favorite thing was to go to my grandmother Johnson's house, her apartment there in the Caliph House, and we have a little priceless little snapshot, Kodak snapshot of my little sister and myself when we are about, let's see, actually I think the photograph was taken before we actually moved to town, because we're about 7 and 9 years of age, all dressed up in our little best dresses to come to town, are standing on the edge of that watering trough, standing up on the end of it. Thankfully, we didn't fall in, and had our pictures taken. And so that's my evidence of a favorite memory of Eureka Springs as it was when I was a child. It had to do with the water, it had to do with the spring right there by my grandma's residence. Well, I was very, very proud when I was able to, when the book was published in 1971, And of course, I was saddened by the loss of my friend Catherine not being there to share in all of that, but feeling that she had left me with something very special. And I was so proud when they had a book signing for me when the book came out, and it was in downtown Eureka Springs in a bookshop that is no longer there today. That was a lot of years ago. In October of that year, they had the book signing for me, and that, I think, when I first produced something that I was so proud of and that I felt was so valuable to the ongoing life of the community, that was probably my proudest moment of having to do with Eureka Springs itself. I think my favorite wild stories have to do with actually one of my something like 3 greats-grandfather, Harp. He was called Squire because of being the senior member of that Harp clan. And Squire Harp used to come over here long before there was a Eureka Springs, hunting deer and bear and and animals for pelts and so on. And he was a good friend of John Gaskins, who's known as the old bear hunter the great bear hunter in our history of this area and of Eureka Springs in particular. And I think my favorite story of the wild creatures is their hunting parties, because they camped at Basin Spring, what they called the Indian Healing Spring. That's what everyone called it in those days. And that would have been in the 1850s and 60s, that far back. And they had a great story where they were hunting one day, and what they called a panther, it's actually a lynx, I think a bobcat or lynx, they'd been after it, shot at it, and they were near on the hillside above Basin Spring, and it ran into the cave up above Basin Spring. And their adventures of trying to figure out how to get that creature out of there, because their hunting dogs were trying to go in and get it, and they knew that if they let their dogs go in, that the animal would probably hurt them so badly they'd die. And so they finally smoked it out, and they got that lynx out and did actually kill it, and had that pelt for their proof of the event. So that's really my favorite story of the wild.
Great.
And the story about the Native American legends, of course, there are so many stories, and they are not only the legends that were known, just like known to my great-great-great-grandfather Harp and so many others of that time, and Gaskins. They had already been told, and the earliest settlers had been told the stories of the Native American residency in this area before they had come. And they knew about the legend of the Indian Healing Spring, which is what they generally spoke of it. And it was well known, not only to the native resident tribespeople, the Osage Indian, this is their area, the Osage, not only to them, but to other tribespeople who had come even from the Great Plains. If it was a really bad winter or a time of deprivation, many of them would come all the way south, looking for a little better situation. And there's a great story about the healing of the daughter of a Sioux chieftain, actually of the Sioux Indian Nation, that she was blinded, young, beautiful girl, and that her people brought her here and were allowed to come into the area. The tradition was that the springs, especially this one, which we later named the basin, and that was the evidence that they had found the Indian healing spring, was the fact that this little stone basin existed and exists today there at the spring. The resident Indians made no effort to keep out any others who came to that particular spot. And so they came there and stayed. In the story of the young woman, they stayed a full month, and her eyes were bathed in the waters of that spring, and she did indeed regain her eyesight and her general health, and they went away rejoicing. And that story was written down. Many of the stories were written down by the early pioneers up in that region. So those stories are actually documented because they are things that happened at the time when there were pioneer settlers all through this part of the country west of the Mississippi. They'd heard of those legends before, and then they began to find the proofs of them, and then their stories were actually written down and published, and those are available to back up all the stories by word of mouth.
Perfect, and right at the end of the tape. You are good.